Hi students, today we're talking about sentence errors. This is lesson 8. Hopefully all of what we're going to talk about is a review from our types of sentences lessons, but today we're going to jump right in with a little bit of a review. First, before we talk about sentence errors, we need to have a common language that we're using to talk about sentences, and all of these words we've used before. So we've used the word clauses and phrases. We've talked about 2 different types of clauses, and we've talked about 4 different types of sentences. I'm going to give you a brief overview of those things. We've talked about how clauses have subjects and verbs, and phrases are groups of words that do not have a subject or a verb, or both. There are 2 types of clauses. Remember, clauses will always have a subject and a verb, so there's an independent clause. An independent clause is a clause with a subject and a verb, and it can stand alone as a sentence. A dependent clause has a subject and a verb, but it cannot stand alone in a sentence because of the subordinating conjunction, the SWABI. The words like since, when, while, after. Those words trigger that there is more information to come. So that clause is dependent on the other information. And the 4 types of sentences, just a quick review. We have a simple sentence. That is a sentence that contains one subject and one verb. A compound sentence is when you put 2 independent clauses together. A complex sentence is when you have a dependent clause and an independent clause together. And a compound complex sentence is when you have 2 or more independent clauses connected with 1 or more dependent clause. Hopefully that's review. If it is not, if you are still stuck on those things, I would suggest you go back and watch the other videos, review your other notes before moving on. We need to talk about the errors that are common when you're trying to form sentences. So some errors have been given specific names, and we're going to talk about these 3 first. We're going to talk about fragments, run-on sentences, and comma splices. First, we have a fragment. You might create a fragment if you have a phrase or a clause appearing as a sentence. But remember, phrases and clauses either lack a subject, a verb, or a complete thought. So how do you fix them? You simply add whatever's missing. In the sentence below, Sally and Lydia from 6th Hour English, that is actually a fragment because it is a phrase standing as a sentence, trying to be a sentence, but it's lacking a verb. So I added the verb, went on a field trip. The next type of error is a run-on sentence. Run-on sentences happen when you are trying to create compound sentences, but you do not join them together correctly. Run-on sentences happen when you connect 2 or more independent clauses, which is a compound sentence, without a word to connect them, a fanboy, a coordinating conjunction, or without punctuation to separate them. So how do you fix this? You follow the sentence combining rules to add the proper words, like conjunctions and punctuation. In the sentence below, Sally and Lydia went on a field trip. The rest of the class stayed at school. What makes this a run-on sentence is that I have 2 independent clauses. Sally and Lydia went on a field trip. The rest of the class stayed at school. So in between this sentence, I need to add a comma and a conjunction. Sally and Lydia went on a field trip, comma, but the rest of class stayed at school. That's how I would fix this. The last named type of error is called a comma splice. This is when you connect 2 independent clauses with only a comma. What you're usually missing is the coordinating conjunction. How do you fix it? You can add the coordinating conjunction. That's the easiest fix. You can replace the comma with a semicolon, or you can add a conjunctive adverb and a comma. Replace the comma with a semicolon, add a conjunctive adverb, and then add a comma, which is a complicated fix. Or you can simply replace the comma with a semicolon. There are other ways to fix comma splices too. You might end up wanting to rewrite the whole sentence. It totally depends on the context of your writing piece. So in the example below, Sally and Lydia went on a field trip, comma, the rest of the class stayed at school. This is a comma splice because I have a single comma doing the job of a period or a comma and a conjunction. So I can add the conjunction, but the rest of class stayed at school. I could add a semicolon, a conjunctive adverb, however, and then a comma. Or I can simply replace the comma with a semicolon. I could rewrite the sentence if I wanted to, but I think that what I like best is this option. All right, so let's look at two examples of these errors. And as I'm reading them, I want you in your brain to try to think about which type of sentence this is below. Missouri doesn't get much snow in December, comma, Minnesota gets more snow than they can handle. First of all, we have to identify what type of error this is. This is a comma splice because I can see a comma trying to join together two sentences, and commas are not strong enough to do that. That's not how commas function. So a way I could fix this is by adding a conjunction, a coordinating conjunction. I could say, but Minnesota gets more snow than they can handle. I could replace the comma with a semicolon and say, however, comma. Or I could simply replace the comma with a semicolon. In this sentence, Christmas is my favorite season of the year. I like it because I get to see my cousins and have a break from school. Whew, there's a lot going on in this sentence. This is a run-on sentence, and this is where the first independent clause starts, and this is where the next independent clause begins. So I need to add a comma and a conjunction. Or I could put a period and leave it at that. The last type of sentence error that we need to talk about doesn't have a name necessarily, but it's the comma rule that goes with complex sentences. We've talked about this already, so I'm not going to talk about it for super long. You just need to know that when you have a complex sentence, you need a comma when the dependent clause comes before the independent clause. If the independent clause comes before the dependent clause, you do not use a comma. A quick way for you to know if the dependent clause comes first is if you have the subordinating conjunction at the beginning of the sentence, like because, since, when, after, although, if. If those words come at the beginning of the sentence, you know you're going to need a comma. If those words come in the middle of a sentence, you probably will not be using a comma before them. And here's an example. We will listen to Christmas music every day because I love it so much. We do not need a comma in this sentence because the independent clause comes first. But if I flip them, because I love it so much, comma, we will listen to Christmas music every day, I do need the comma because the dependent clause comes first. All right, students, that's it for this video. Make sure that you study up. What we have coming up next is a test over lessons 4 through 8. These are all things related to sentences. So make sure that you know your stuff, and I'll see you in class on Friday.